Catalysts have revitalized ancient techniques for channeling elemental forces, with a few modern improvements. They use jade tech spheres to create concentrated wells of immense power. Using their augment abilities within range of the spheres enhances their effects. With the weight of Tyria's fundamental magics behind every blow from their hammers, these elementalists are a steady presence in melee combat.
Alright, we're hopping into the Catalyst. Notably, these are definitely not the celestial creatures. We definitely saw a lot of feedback on the Reddit. Clearly we have there's a Kieran, there's a Salt Spray, there's a Turtle, there's a Phoenix. These are, yes, those are the creature shapes that are the same as the celestial beings, but that wouldn't really make any sense to conjure those as kind of elemental manifestations. Mm-hmm. So these are just more, elemental manifestations.
An homage to
definitely an homage, kind of that nod to Nautical Quarter from Guild Wars 1. So hopping into it, for some reason we decided to give Elementals a hammer, 20 skills. We have a lot to get through here. We're going to try to speed it up a little bit. I'm going to talk really, really, really fast. Maybe not that fast, but we'll start with a refreshing mechanic before we get into the hammer. We'll press some buttons. This is giving me access to energy. You can see the energy bar kind of charging up here above the F5 skill. Very similar to how Warrior Adrenaline works, where hit enemies get energy. And that's going to enable you to deploy, I'm just going to cheat at this point, deploy the Jade Sphere. And what this is going to create essentially what is a spell area on the ground. That the primary goal here is that it's going to be, see I'm building up might, this is a fire field. If I cast it on an enemy, this is actually also going to do a little bit of damage. In competitive modes, this damage pulse is very, very low. It's actually using the 0.01 multiplier, because the primary value of the skill is the boons, it is the combo field, but that was not quite up to what we really needed it to be in PvE, so we put a damage pulse on there and just put it really, really low to make sure that it didn't create too much of a problem. So the cool thing of this is that it's going to swap with your element. I'm in Fire Attunement, I summon the Fire Jade Sphere. Swap to Water, now I have the Water Jade Sphere active. This one's giving me Resolution, this is a Water field. Swap to Air, Lightning Field, this is giving me Quickness, very exciting. Finally, once we get into Earth, this is a poison field. There's notably no Earth element combo field type. So we talked a little bit internally about, okay, what thematically makes sense. There are a few options. We kind of talked through Earth, we talked through Dark. Smoke fields, I brought it up and then we're like, no, bad idea, don't give AoE stealth. That got shut down in about 5 seconds, but it was...
Please.
It was on the table for just a small amount of time and then just got knocked off. No longer on the table. Went with Poison Field. Poison Field, notably, is a valuable thing to have for the kind of bruiser playstyle that we're going to see with this character, because blast finishing in that is going to be AoE weakness. So honestly, nothing too crazy going with the Jade Sphere. We're going to have a lot of combos in the hammer kit itself that are going to play really well off of those combo fields. You don't actually need a field on the hammer kit at all. Let me just make sure we hit all the tooltips for these deploy skills real quick. There's also going to be a little bit of interplay with the utilities once we get there, where using them in particular Jade Sphere areas is going to give you a little bit of a bonus effect. All right, let's get through the hammer skills rapid fire. 20 skills to get through. We previewed a little bit of the kind of the melee gameplay of this character. It's also going to have kind of some mid-range elements in fire and air. We're going to see a lot more melee in water and earth, and then more of a mid-range DPS character in fire air. And that's because when we're thinking about what is the hammer, what space does this exist for in the Elementalist, the very natural kind of understanding of what is a hammer is this slow-moving, deliberate, lumbering melee bruiser character. But for the Elementalist, Dagger exists in a lot of that space already, so we don't just want to stomp over Dagger and say, okay, here's Hammer. Hammer is the new melee bruiser weapon. So we kind of left a few of those elements there as kind of water and earth, and then made a lot more of the aggressive damage components of this is more of a melee or a mid-range character. And so starting off, I'm actually going to start off with skill 3 here, because this is kind of a shared mechanic across all 4 attunements. We're going to see this summons a projectile circling around the catalyst, and this is going to hit enemies that it passes through. Pretty exciting stuff. More of a melee skill here, but notably this does give you access to a little bit of a boost, and it's going to be variable per attunement. We're going to see fire gives you outgoing damage. Makes sense. So even if you are kind of standing at range, you're still going to get value at the skill because you get some damage bonus, fire off the rest of my abilities, get some bonus damage there. And then we're going to have, I'm a little bit too slow there, but you see we have the flip over that recasts this circular projectile at my target. So we're really going to want to maximize the uptime of how long I get this damage buff before firing off the skill. But then the super cool interaction is that when I go into water and summon the water projectile, it actually refreshes the duration of all of the other projectiles. So you see now I got 3 going, hop into earth. I have all 4 of these projectiles. All of these are giving me buffs. Then you can refire, throw all 4 of those projectiles at your target, and that's going to be kind of the big damage payoff from this kit.
That's so cool.
And so you see here, now going into the tooltip, we start with each of these circular projectiles are going to be a little bit of damage, a little bit of condition, but the circling component is going to be a little bit lower, and then once you refire it, get that grand finale is what the skill is actually called. You get a higher damage, higher condition application there. So real quick, the buffs here, Earth gives you damage reduction, Air gives you critical chance, Water gives you Condi damage reduction, and as we touched on with Fire, it gives you access to that increased outgoing damage. So it's going to create some really interesting gameplay. I fired a skill I didn't want to, but that's okay. Create kind of this really interesting gameplay where you're going to be wanting to move through your attunements and fire off these abilities that we'll come back to real quick, making sure that you're casting your spells and getting these refreshes on these damage bonuses before they expire, and then culminating in the big kind of finale at the end. And so this gives a little bit, one of the goals here was also to give a little bit more incentive to even go into water and earth, for especially in PvE modes where just a little bit, you care a little bit less about those, you want to maximize damage, but now you'll want to duck in for even just a second, cast the circular projectile, extend the rest of your damage buffs, and maximize the damage of that skill. So let's hop back into the fire kit and just hammer through these skills. A lot of damage, a lot of burning on these skills. Nothing too out of place for the hammer, or for the fire attunement on Elementalist, that is. Recommend having a target for any projectile skills. Singeing Strike, this is just a burning plus damage. Nothing too crazy. Moving into Surging Flames, this is a different flavor of that skill, of a projectile skill. This is not going to use the same shotgun style mechanic that we see on stuff like Fan of Fire, but the idea here is because we're looking to target this more mid-range gameplay with fire attunement, this is only going to hit each target once. And you see there's a little bit of a cooldown protection there when I cheat and have no recharge. That's going to make sure this doesn't multi-hit, because then we can guarantee, okay, this is always going to do a good amount of damage when I'm playing this character from kind of this mid-range style, and I don't need to dive into melee range because it's a little bit more dangerous. We do have some better defensive options in traits and some of the utilities, because, I mean, we meme about how Elementalists always go into downstate and die and all that fun stuff. We do want to make sure there's a few more better defensive options to this character.
Thank you.
And so we'll get to those in a little bit. And again, keeping range as the main damaging components there. Moving into Triple Seer, we already talked about Flame Wheel here, so Triple Seer is up next. This is kind of a different style of an AoE damage skill. You see it summons actually 3 different spell areas, and each of these has its own kind of unique target cap, and they all have a much lower damage than you'd expect, because the idea is you want to line them up perfectly. Come over to this golem over here, who still has vulnerability from a long time ago. But if you line it up perfectly, all 3 of these hit, so that's going to maximize the damage, maximize the burning. So this is going to play really well with crowd control skills, or just enemies that don't move, like these golems or bosses in PvE. And finally, we're going to have Molten End. So we saw a lot of burning on literally all their 4 skills in this kit apply burning, and so Molten End here, the final skill, is going to reward you for striking a burning enemy. It is going to give you access to Might and Fury per target struck. So that guy gave me 1. Over here, it's going to give me a little bit more, longer Fury duration, more Might stacks. And again, this is a blast finisher, so playing well with Jade Sphere, while I'm in Fire Attunement, it's going to give me access to Might stacks. Alternatively, it has this kind of delayed cast time, so there's the opportunity to start casting this ability, switch into water, and then if you move into that field in time, that's going to give you the area blast finisher in a water field AoE healing, which is a little bit more valuable. We're going to go over to the air attunement next, because we're going to go through damage, and then we'll come back to the kind of melee bruisery style gameplay from water and air. So, air attunement, Wind Slam, nothing crazy. Projectile, deals damage. We already touched on Crescent Wind here as well, so next up is Hurricane of Pain. This is the channeled kind of AoE, kind of that 100 Blades style, rapid fire, channeled big damage skill on the 2 slot. So the idea is here is that the Ellie spins their hammer so quickly, and then redirects their elemental energy and shoots it off into this targeted hurricane over here by all these golems. This is kind of the big damage payoff. You really want to set this up with CC. Moving into Windstorm. This is something that we saw in the video where people were worried about going off cliffs. Well, just pay attention to your surroundings. It's probably not that big a deal. But the idea here is here's the kind of the disengage, knockdown on there as well. But this is a little bit of if someone's diving you, knock them down, back up, respace, get into that mid-range style again, and really maximize your damage without being able to be pressured. And then finally here we have Shock Blast. So this is another this is a much slower moving projectile. You see, we throw it out, going to pierce through enemies while it's moving. Once it lands on the ground, we're going to have this kind of delayed explosion, and that's going to be another stun. So some nice crowd control here in the Air Attunement kit. And again, this is kind of a delayed blast finisher, so you can throw this out, switch attunements, get the field you want, and get that blast finisher. Next up, we're going to move into water. So this is already getting back into that melee style we see here with the auto attack combo. Nothing too crazy. Chill on the third hit. Again, kind of this thing that melee characters want to see. Second skill, we have Rain of Blows. More chill. This is 3-second chill and a 6-second cooldown is pretty notable. But the caveat here is you have to hit all 4 of these hits against the same target. So rewarding you for either crowd controlling or just sticking to your target. A little bit of damage on there as well. Some potentially high chill uptime if you maximize that spacing. Skipped over Icy Coil because we already talked about that one. Next up we have Crashing Font. So here's some mobility. You can use this to go in. You can use it to kind of reposition, go out if you need to. Ideally you're going to go in because it's going to reward you for hitting targets. And it's going to heal per target struck. So hop in there. This is also a leap finisher. Fire this off in the water sphere, give you a little bit of healing on top. And just a pretty big heal if you do hit all 5 targets. That's also going to set up the final skill of this kit, Cleansing Typhoon. This is going to be a similar kind of PB AoE hammer swing that gives you access, or it's going to cleanse a condition per target struck. So again, maximize your targets, maximize the value of these skills. Moving into Earth, we're going to see a little bit more defense, more tankiness, more crowd control. Nothing crazy on the auto attack skill here. Stone Strike, just PB AoE damage. Second up, we have Whirling Stones. Another kind of much slower, more deliberate channel. Earth is a little bit less aggressive, so it kind of a little bit slower in how it deals its damage, but it still has a reasonable damage potential from the skill. A lot of bleeding, a lot of damage, if you really maximize all those hits. Rocky Loop again, that's the circular projectile of the Earth Attunement. Next up we have Immutable Stones. This is going to be a single shot, single attack block. This is a mechanic we've seen in a lot of skills across the game, where you block an attack and you get a reward for blocking an attack. In this case, the reward is an aura. And that aura is actually based on your active attunement. So if we just fire off a skill here real quick, if I can type correctly.
You're really committed to not clicking skills.
Well, I have to type so that to tell the golem, hey, use a skill on me. As you see, I got Magnetic Aura. But there's a little bit of a window here, especially because the block is also channeled. I can start channeling this block, then switch to air. That's going to give me Shocking Aura instead. So depending on the situation, you might want to get a different aura depending on, melee range Shocking Aura is much better. Maybe you just want the damage mitigation from Frost Aura, Fire Aura, whatever. All of those things are available with Immutable Stone. And then finally we have Ground Pound. So this is kind of that big crowd control, also the blast finisher of the Earth Attunement. Instead of just doing another knockdown, that's something the dagger already does. So again, trying to create a little bit more space between those two playstyles. This is going to be a longer duration immobilize, and that allows us to put a little more damage, a little bit of bleeding on top of that. So again, that very long wind up and a really big shockwave there, applying immobilize and bleeding. So next up, we're going to move into the utility skills. So these are augments. That's another skill type that we kind of didn't have something that we wanted to, something existing, made up augments. What is an augment? For the most part, these are kind of duration-based buffs, and we're going to see a few different flavors of these again. And the notable kind of bonus is that if you use these in the matching element sphere, all of these are going to have a particular element that they are kind of associated with. It's going to give you a little bonus. So we start here with Soothing Water. This is just going to be a pretty basic pulse heal over time, nothing too crazy. If you use this while you're inside the water sphere, you won't actually see it on this usage because I don't have any conditions, but each of these pulses will then cleanse a condition as well, so a little bit of extra value there on top. Next, I'm going to hop over to Fortified Earth, which is going to be the Earth Augment. This one is kind of where we really felt the need to give LE access to a good defensive utility skill. Obviously, we have like Mistform as a hard invul and a longer cooldown. Earth Shield's a little bit more clunky to use to get that invul longer cooldown. Fortified Earth, just a pretty standard channeled block. This is something that LE doesn't really have access to. So giving them access to this on a 30-second cooldown should kind of enable that melee style a little bit better than some of the existing options. And the slight bonus here is that used inside the Earth Sphere, I am going to get Barrier on top. Next up, we're going to move to Invigorating Air. So here's the Stunbreak, another pretty reasonable defensive cooldown because it's going to increase your endurance regeneration, which is relevant if I don't have infinite endurance. Yep. So endurance regeneration, nothing crazy. We've seen it before. The bonus here is super speed, a little bit, not the most exciting, but Stunbreak, defensive value. And then finally, we're going to have, not quite finally, but next up we have Shattering Ice. So the idea behind Shattering Ice is that it makes all of your attacks have a splash damage component. There's an ICD on this, kind of similar to One Wolf Pack, but instead of the single target extra hit, this is going to give you a multi-target extra hit. And the idea, one of the goals here is that it gives you more energy because you're hitting more targets with all these bonus strikes. Cast this inside the water sphere. All those bonus attacks are going to give you a little bit of chill there. And finally, we have Relentless Fire. So here's the Fire Augment, and this one's very straightforward, just increased outgoing damage. If you use it inside the Fire Sphere, it makes your attacks unblockable, so it really allows you to unleash kind of the maximum damage potential of this character. And finally, last up, we have the elite skill, Elemental Celerity. This is effectively cooldown reduction. While you have this augment active, all of your outgoing strikes are going to reduce the cooldown of your weapon skills. Obviously, I'm cheating, I have no cooldowns anyway, but in normal gameplay, this is potentially a lot of cooldown reduction, 8-second duration, 1 second off per hit, and a 1 second interval. So up to 8 seconds of cooldown reduction for your entire weapon kit, which is, as we see here, 20 skills. That's a lot of stuff. This one is actually a kind of a universal augment. It will inherit from any Jade Sphere, give you a boon depending on which element you are attuned to, so Might, Vigor, Fury, or Protection. So we're back here with the Catalyst traits. Something I forgot to mention on Vindicator that we'll also see here on the Catalyst. This is not final art for the trait line, or it's maybe Catalyst is just a little bit more abstract in concept, so it's really no, it's just not going to be the final art. We didn't quite get those in for the beta event, but we got some nice colors in there. So that's,
turns out we're still working on this game. It's not done.
That's one of the values of running beta events, right? Like everything doesn't quite need to be fully ready to go because we still have a lot of time until launch. And so let's just dive into the traits real quick. A couple things we're going to see. Let's just start out with the minor trait, like we've been doing. This trait is called Elemental Empowerment, and also gives you a buff called Elemental Empowerment. So that's pretty sensible, I think. Good naming conventions. And the idea here is that as long as you're in combat, this is going to be giving you... hello. One moment. Here's I have broken things with all of my cheating. As
break everything.
Oh no, I died in a fractal. Oh no. Okay, we're fine.
Oh no.
Okay. Broken armor. Outrageous. Anyway, let's get back in here and get in combat, and there we go, we have Elemental Empowerment. So what is this buff? This buff says, let's move this on the screen. Okay, I was actually in a decent position anyway. But Elemental Empowerment, this gives you percentage bonus to all of your stats. So this is not any sort of flat value. This is going to look at what are my stats, and then give you a percentage bonus on top of that. We're going to see more ways to get access to this buff and some additional payoffs in some of the later traits. But so this is like, if I build Berserker, I'm going to get more power, more precision, more ferocity. If I build, say, soldiers, no one builds soldiers, please don't build soldiers, but you'll get more power, toughness, and vitality. And this is, it's going to scale off of your stats. So next up, Elemental Epitome. This is kind of the first touch into rewarding combos, and this is something we wanted to do for this character because we knew that the Jade Sphere is going to create these combo fields. We're going to put a lot of combo features on the Hammer Kit. Ellie already has a lot of combos as well, whether it's through arcane skills or their other weapons or Evasive Arcana, all these things. So getting in a combo payoff is kind of a cool mechanic thematic to this character. And the payoff here is that you get an aura based off your current attunement. So this is potentially super powerful because it's a per attunement cooldown. I can get Magnetic Aura in Earth, hop into air, combo again, get Shocking Aura, hop into water, so on and so forth. And also, every time I gain an aura, I'm going to get a stack of Elemental Empowerment. So this is notable that it's when I gain an aura and not when I apply an aura, because this is going to play really well with Tempest, a nice little flavor combo between Elemental and Elite specs. If someone else grants me an aura, I still get the Elemental Empowerment here. We're going to see that interaction a little bit more on some of the other aura traits. once we dive into those. And so let's just start off with one of them, hardened auras. We're going to see a lot of aura-related traits across the top of the trait line here. We're going to see a lot of elemental empowerment traits across the middle, and we're going to see some more boon focus, not quite boon support, but more sphere, jade sphere focused traits along the bottom. And so starting off with hardened auras, every time I gain an aura, it's going to give me a stacking bonus, or a stacking buff called hardened auras. So we'll just demo this super quick, don't need to go too far in there, but see, I get hardened auras, and every time you combo, it's going to then refresh that. This is the mechanic we saw with Lethal Tempo back on the Willbender, where every time you get this trigger, it's going to refresh the duration. So as long as you continue getting auras, whether it's from the trait that we just talked about, Elemental Epitome, or from the rest of your kit, or from your allies, this is going to allow you to kind of maximize that damage reduction up to 10%. Pretty decent for the adept trait slot. I'm going to go through all the aura traits first, so switching up my plan a little bit here. Empowering auras is going to be the aura trait of the master tier, which is similar mechanic. Every time I get an aura, I get a stack of this buff. This gives me outgoing damage, power damage and condition damage, so potentially up to 10% 10% overall for each of those damage types if I'm maintaining my aura stacks. Finally, the Grandmaster is going to be a bit more exciting. This is gain stability when you gain an aura. So probably not super valuable for PvE players, but in competitive modes, you potentially have access to a lot of auras. So this is potentially a lot of stability. Obviously, every time you combo, if you're off cooldown with Elemental Epitome, you're going to get some stability on top. And that's just going to give you a little bit more of that bruiser melee playstyle that will be enabled by having more stability. So next up, we're going to go into the elemental empowerment traits. So there's going to be a few different ways to stack up elemental empowerment, because we saw here max stacks up to 10 times, 10% all stats, pretty powerful as long as you get up there. Vicious empowerment, the first one here, every time you disable a foe or immobilize a foe, it's going to give you a little bit of might and a little bit of empowerment. So this one's going to play pretty nicely with actually Arcane Power is an interesting, potentially interesting trait slot if you take Arcane Power and you take the Arcane trait, because you can share Elemental Surge and then apply all of those things are actually sourced from the Elementalist. That Immobilize is going to give you a bunch of stacks of this, really cap you out in a very short burst window. So potentially an option, maybe Arcane Power gets a little bit more use. Moving into Master Tier, we have Evasive Empowerment. So this is every time you evade an attack, you will get some amount of this empowerment buff, and you also get Vigor. So that'll just kind of keep the train going. Dodge attacks well, get Vigor, get Elemental Empowerment, get more stats, everyone's happy. And finally, in the Grandmaster slot, we're going to see the kind of payoff for hitting all of these empowerment stacks. If you are at max stacks, you will have double effectiveness. So instead of 1% per stack, you're going to get 2% per stack. At 10 stacks, you get 20% to all of your stats, which is actually a pretty exorbitant amount. And so to kind of counteract that, it's going to be a little hard to maintain at those high values for a long amount of time, but it's going to create kind of that burst window where you're either super tanky or super offensive and really kind of unleash the maximum potential of the character. Finally, we're going to get into kind of the Jade Sphere, Boony type traits in the bottom line here, with starting with Energized Elements. So every time you swap attunements while you're in combat, you're going to get a little bit of energy. It's also going to give you Fury. So this actually fills an old gap that when we changed Arcane Fury over to Arcane Prowess, you no longer got Fury on attunement swap, but now the Catalyst also has access to that if you so choose, while also giving some energy on top. Moving on, we have Spectacular Sphere. So this is whenever you deploy your Jade Sphere, it's going to just do a point-blank AoE boon application in the area. And the boons are going to be a little bit less powerful than the pulsing boon of the field itself, but we see Might, Fury, Vigor, or Resistance. Depending on what attunement you're in, you're going to give a little bit of initial impact to the deploy of the Jade Sphere. And finally, we're going to have Sphere Specialist in the Grandmaster slot. So this, if you really want to lean into potentially, especially quickness, I think is the most valuable thing that you can do with the Jade Sphere. Sphere Specialist, boons applied by your sphere have increased duration, 50%, very significant number there. Obviously, some of the durations here are a bit on the lower side, but look at this quickness pulse has become 2.5 seconds per tick, so you can be able to stack that up pretty high over the course of the Jade Sphere deploy. So this is going to trade off some of the damage from the middle trait here with Empowered Empowerment, just to get more of that boon support if you really want it. It doesn't really have all the tools to be a pure boon support, but a lot of quickness potential with Sphere Specialist. That's also going to empower the boons from Spectacular Sphere as well. It's a little bit more of a boon gameplay style option for the Catalyst there. So a few different things you can do, more of that potentially ranged glassy build, or that more melee bruiser, or maybe a little bit more of the boon side of things. A lot of opportunity. Elementalist as a whole, always a pretty flexible class, so Catalyst doing a lot more of the same. And that's all the traits. We kind of speed ran through all of them. I don't know if anyone has the splits, so we'll come back to those, look at those, and we'll run this again next week and try to beat all the times, but definitely not. Let's not do that. But that's the gist of the Catalyst, and that actually covers all the Elite specs. So we'll throw it back to Ruby and Indigo.